Hi, everybody. Yesterday, at the end of the Great Depression presentation, I said that what brought the United States and really the rest of the world out of the Great Depression was World War II. World War II, especially in the United States, put Americans back to work. Americans that had been out of work for most of the 1930s, so for about a decade. And it provided many factory jobs for workers to, especially women will be put to work, will go to work in factories when men go off to fight World War II. But it will help build military munitions for World War II. It will help build ships, tanks, jeeps, guns, everything, anything and everything you could imagine that's needed to fight a war. Those factories in the United States will do that, and so it's a tremendous boom to our economy. And after a decade of really without any kind of reliable work, Americans are finally working once again. So we're only going to look at major events of World War II and the leaders at the time of the major countries involved in World War II. You'll be watching a video on Monday about World War II, and you really get more in depth with covering all the wars in the 20th century when you get into 11th grade. So in 5th grade, we just kind of go over the big ideas. So let's begin. The world leaders, beginning with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was President of the United States from 1933 to 1945. So he leads the United States during our war against Nazi Germany and dies just about, about 2 months or 6 weeks before the war in Europe ends. And then his vice president takes over as President of the United States. And in your note page, all you do is just, write down who he is and what his role was as far as President of the United States during that time period. The other world leader, probably the most infamous of all the world leaders during World War II, was Adolf Hitler. He was a dictator of Germany who believed in fascism. He believed that Germans were superior to other people and hated and blamed Jews for Germany's problems. Benito Mussolini was the dictator of Italy who promised to attack and conquer other countries. He allied himself with Hitler. The leader of Great Britain was Winston Churchill. He was the prime minister and was part of the Allied forces. Hideki Tojo was military leader of Japan who allied with Hitler and led the attack on Pearl Harbor. Axis powers include Germany, Italy, and Japan. The Allied powers include Great Britain, France, United States, and Soviet Union. The beginning. Germany invades Poland. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, setting off war in Europe. The Soviet Union also invaded Poland and the Baltic nations. In response, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany. In this early stage of the war, Germany and the Soviet Union were on the same side. They both had an agreement that they would not invade each other's country and instead would fight together against the Allied powers. Well, lo and behold, you can well imagine that Germany is not very good at keeping their word, just like they weren't with the Sussex Pledge in World War I, and they did invade the Soviet Union, and therefore the Soviet Union switched sides and joined the Allies. So Germany invades France, and you see a picture here, a very famous picture of Adolf Hitler and his officers walking in front of the Eiffel Tower, a very famous landmark in Paris, France. Germany invades France on May 14th, 1940, and captures Paris by June. And they control France until D-Day in 1944. So they control it for over 4 years. The Battle of Britain. Germany begins bombing Great Britain in July 1940. Bombing of London begins in September. This attack is known as the Battle of Britain. And you can see here from this map that um, France is used as kind of a launching pad for German forces to be able to invade and drop bombs on Great Britain, which is a much more what's the word? More formidable foe. They're really the enemy that Great Britain wants to get rid of in these early stages of the war. France really was not that much of a threat to Germany, but England certainly was. So it was imperative that they take over France so they can then use it as a way to launch their attacks on Great Britain. These are just pictures of London in England after and during the war or Battle of Britain. This is a map of World War II combat in Europe. The red represents all the areas that Nazi Germany has taken over. So they have expanded their control, just as Hitler wanted to do, over most of Europe. The yellow represents one tiny little country, Switzerland, which has always remained neutral in every major conflict. And the green, of course, represents the Allied nations. But yes, this is, just looking at this map, you see that, the ultimate goal for Adolf Hitler was to control all of Europe. And boy, he sure has that pretty well accomplished by 1942. The U.S. is sympathetic to their ally from World War I, Great Britain. Our government decides to give war supplies to Great Britain. And so in a program called Lend-Lease, we decide to lend different, various war supplies to Great Britain in their fight against Nazi Germany, all the while we are saying that we are neutral in this war and not getting involved. Just like President Wilson said in World War I, we were going to remain neutral. President Roosevelt makes the same proclamation that we will remain neutral during this war, but we're still giving Great Britain supplies. So it's, yes, we're neutral in that we're not sending men, but we are sending munitions and we are sending food and whatever else they need to help be successful. In return, Great Britain gave the U.S. access to military bases in the Caribbean and Bermuda. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The U.S. declares war on Japan the next day. Germany then declares war on the United States. The U.S. declares war on Germany. So again, we have the allies of Germany and Japan. So when the United States declares war on Japan for having bombed Pearl Harbor, sunk a tremendous and destroyed a tremendous amount of the naval fleet in the Pacific, and killed 1,400 sailors, they declare war on them. Germany then, even though Germany was not part of this attack, they declare war on the United States because their ally, Japan, had been declared war on by the United States. The United States reciprocates by declaring war on Germany. Japanese internment camps in the United States. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, within the next 18 months or so, Japanese Americans will be forced to live in internment camps, really kind of like concentration camps in the west, the northwest, and the southwest parts of the United States. Primarily, they were located or shipped to internment camps in those areas of the country because that's where the largest Japanese American population centers were. And even though these people that were put in these internment camps we're Americans of Japanese heritage, just like I'm an American of German heritage. They were the same thing. They were born and raised in the United States. They were productive citizens of society. They had businesses, and they found themselves in a very difficult situation where they were forced to give up all their possessions. Their businesses were taken away from them, and they were put in internment camps because there was a fear that they would somehow uh, help America or Japan defeat America. And so it was really an incredibly dark period in U.S. history. This is just a map of various centers throughout the United States. We have one here in Crystal City, Texas. A lot of these, by the way, are no longer exist. They've been torn down because they represented such a dark period in our history where we actually put Americans in camps during wartime. Um, but this is a historic marker located in Crystal City, Texas. And this camp not only interred Japanese Americans, but also Germans and Italians. And this is just what a typical map, or excuse me, a typical camp would look like. As you can see, it's got the tall fences, razor wire fences, guard towers. You've got guards riding on horseback, protecting the perimeter of those camps. The island hopping campaign was used in the Pacific. Not only did Japan attack Pearl Harbor on December 7th, but they also attacked a number of our territories, such as Guam, Midway, American Samoa, and other places. And then they took over these areas. And so the United States began a campaign of attacking and taking over these same islands. And island hopping is the phrase given to the military strategy to gain military bases and secure the many small islands in the Pacific. And that's what they did one by one so that they could eventually reach Japan and use these islands as a place to refuel their ships, their planes, and ultimately to attack and bomb Japan. The Battle of Midway. The U.S. defeats Japan in the Battle of Midway in June 1942. This is the turning point of the war in the Pacific. A turning point means that from that point on, the United States had the advantage during the war against Japan. The invasion of the Soviet Union, and this is what I was telling you about earlier. Germany invades the Soviet Union in 1941. The Soviet Union fought back and had more men. The Germans were also not prepared for the harsh Soviet winter. The Soviet Union defeats Germany at the Battle of Stalingrad. This is the turning point of the war in Eastern Europe. The Normandy invasion, D-Day, otherwise known as, the Allies come up with a surprise attack to take back mainland Europe from Germany. American and Allied troops under the leadership of General Dwight D. Eisenhower land in Normandy, France on June 6, 1944. This important day is called D-Day, and it begins the liberation of Western Europe. Europe is finally free on May 8th, 1945, when the Germans surrendered to the Allies. This is known as VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. And this is just a map illustrating the various attacks on the Normandy beaches here along France. And in a reverse situation, now Great Britain is launching their attacks and their invasions from their shores and taking, which ultimately will lead to taking France and all of Europe back. This is just another graphic showing a more detailed picture of the various phases of attacks on France and Normandy beaches at this time. And I have, following this, a PowerPoint of James Earl Rudder, who is very famous in this area, and I included that on the next in a file after this presentation that you can look at to see what his role was in World War II, especially the D-Day invasion, why we have so many things in the Bryan College Station area named after him. So the atomic bomb, the U.S. began developing the atomic bomb through the Manhattan Project. The U.S. drops 2 atomic bombs on Japanese towns called Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This forces Japan to surrender on August 14, 1945, ending World War II. We call this day VJ Day.